Okay, so let's try and unpack this. When did humans really begin to reshape the Earth? On a global scale.
Not just like locally changing landscapes.
Yeah, but altering the actual atmosphere itself, it feels like a huge question.
It is. And for a while now, there's been this term floating around, the Anthropocene.
Right, the Anthropocene. I've definitely heard that.
Yeah, and it's kind of a funny thing because as a formal geological epoch, like the Holocene or Pleistocene, it's actually been formally rejected by the official body.
Oh, really? Rejected. I didn't realize it was official.
Yeah, quite recently. But, and this is the important bit, it's still incredibly useful. Loads of researchers, academics, they use it all the time. It's become this effective shorthand.
A shorthand for what, exactly?
For
Yeah.
this whole period of significant human impact on climate, on ecosystems, the whole shebang. The age of human interference, basically.
Okay, that makes sense. So even if it's not an official epoch, the concept is still really valuable for discussion.
Precisely. It helps frame the conversation.
Got it. So for this deep dive then, our mission is to dig into some, well, pretty fascinating science that suggests this age of interference might have started surprisingly early. We're going to look at what the Earth's atmosphere itself tells us, right? Using these amazing natural records locked in ice cores.
Exactly. Ice cores are like diaries written by the atmosphere.
So we're basically going back in time using the ice to uncover this sort of hidden history about the planet and, well, about us.
It's really fascinating when you think about it. The answer isn't just geology, is it? It's a truly global human story, etched right there in the ice.
Okay, so thinking about the start date. When did people generally think this Anthropocene or this age of impact began before these newer ideas came along?
Well, there was a whole range of proposals. Some pointed to the Industrial Revolution,
Big
obviously,
coal factories.
right? Others looked later, maybe the mid-20th century, the Great Acceleration.
And you mentioned the atomic bomb detonations earlier. Was that a serious contender?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The radioactive isotopes left a very clear global signal. That was a strong candidate for a mid-century start. Some even suggested the early 17th century.
So quite a spread. What was the key thing scientists were looking for to nail down a sort of pre-industrial start?
They needed a golden spike, a clear, globally synchronized marker in the geological record, whether that's sediment or ice or coral, that undeniably shows the start of major human influence.
A distinct fingerprint.
Exactly. Something unambiguous.
Which brings us to where things get really interesting, doesn't it? This research from about, what, a decade ago? 2015?
That's the one. Simon Lewis and Mark Maslin, two Earth system scientists.
And they proposed a specific moment, didn't they? Found in the ice cores, something that kind of blew people's minds.
You did. They pointed to 1610.
1610. Wow. That's much earlier than the Industrial Revolution. What was the evidence? What did they find in the ice?
They found this really noticeable dip, an unprecedented drop in atmospheric CO2 levels.
It's not a drop, not a rise.
A drop, yeah. They called it the Orbis spike. Orbis meaning world or globe in Latin.
Okay, the Orbis spike. A global CO2 drop in 1610. But why? If it wasn't natural, what caused it? You'd expect human impact to increase CO2, right?
Usually, yes. But this was different. It wasn't caused by less CO2 being produced. It was caused by more CO2 being absorbed
Absorbed by what?
by trees. Massive forest regrowth, specifically happening across the Americas.
Okay, wait. Forests regrowing on a massive scale
Hmm.
in the Americas around 1610. Why would that happen?
It's actually a really tragic story.
Yeah.
It links directly back to European arrival in 1492 and then the waves of colonization through the 1500s.
Okay.
The colonizers brought diseases, smallpox being the big one, to populations that had absolutely no immunity.
Right. Devastating.
Utterly. We're talking about a demographic collapse. Estimates are around 50 million indigenous people died across the Americas, a staggering number.
50 million. So what did that mean for the land?
It meant huge areas of farmland, millions of hectares that have been actively cultivated by these large populations were suddenly abandoned, left untended.
And nature takes over.
Exactly. Forests started reclaiming that land very quickly. More trees mean more photosynthesis, pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere.
And this regrowth was so vast, it actually lowered global CO2 levels enough to be measured in ice cores halfway around the world.
That's what Lewis and Maslin argued. The scale of regrowth was enough to create that measurable dip, that Orbis spike, around 1610.
That's incredible. It really connects massive societal upheaval, human tragedy, directly to a planetary scale atmospheric change, even centuries ago.
It shows how sensitive the Earth system can be, doesn't it? and how interconnected things were, even back then.
Mind-boggling, really. Like you said, the Earth has this memory stored in the ice. But, okay, you hinted there's a twist, that the story doesn't end there.
Right. So, fast forward a bit, there's newer research led by a scientist named Vincent Gauci.
Gauci. Okay. What's his take?
His work supports the idea of an early start date, this pre-industrial human impact. But his research points maybe even a little earlier.
Earlier than 1610s.
Slightly. He suggests 1592, and it's not focused on CO2, but on a different greenhouse gas.
Which gas?
Methane, CH4.
Methane. Okay, why methane? What did the ice core show for 1592?
They show a distinct minimum in atmospheric methane concentration, right around 1592, which is exactly 100 years after Columbus's first voyage.
A minimum. So methane levels drop then, too. Why is methane so significant here?
Well, methane's a powerhouse greenhouse gas. Over a 20-year period, it's something like 80 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat.
80 times. Wow.
Yeah. But the key thing here is its lifetime in the atmosphere. It's much shorter than CO2, just under 10 years on average.
Okay, so it breaks down faster.
Much faster. Which means the methane levels recorded in the ice cores are way more responsive to sudden changes in its sources or sinks. It's like a higher resolution picture compared to CO2.
So a dip in methane around 1592 is potentially a really clear, sharp signal of some rapid change happening right then.
Exactly. It makes you ask, what could have caused a sudden drop in global methane linked to events in the Americas around that time?
And this brings us back to trees. You mentioned trees earlier with methane, which seems surprising.
Yeah, this is where Gauci's research gets really novel. His team uncovered processes involving trees and methane that weren't really fully appreciated before.
Okay, intriguing. So how do trees affect methane? I thought they dealt mainly with CO2.
They do, primarily.
Right.
But Gauci's work highlighted how forests, especially on certain types of soil, these free-draining soils can actually remove methane from the atmosphere.
Remove methane? How?
It's down to microbes. These trees, their bark, their roots, they host specific types of microbes. And these little guys can actually consume methane directly from the air. It's a methane sink.
A methane sink on trees. That's wild. So mechanism one is?
Mechanism one is direct uptake. Just like with the CO2 story. Massive forest regrowth happens on the abandoned farmland after the population collapse. Suddenly, you have vastly more woody tree surface area trunks, branches in contact with the atmosphere. More surface area means more of these methane-eating microbes doing their thing.
So more trees literally scrubbed more methane out of the air. Okay, that makes sense. What's the second mechanism? You mentioned water earlier.
Right. Mechanism two involves how trees interact with the water cycle. Think about rainfall hitting a forest canopy.
Okay, a lot gets caught in the leaves, branches.
Exactly. Some of that evaporates straight back into the air interception loss. Some is taken up by the roots and released through transpiration. The point is, less water actually makes it through the ground, and less water runs off into rivers and eventually into wetlands.
Ah, wetlands. And wetlands are important for methane
Because they are a major natural source of methane. Waterlogged soils, low oxygen conditions, perfect for methane-producing microbes.
Got it. So the argument is the massive forest regrowth intercepted more rainwater.
Leading to potentially less water flowing into wetland areas, maybe causing a small but significant shrinkage in the total area of methane-producing wetlands globally.
So you've got two things happening around 1592, potentially. More trees directly sucking up methane, and possibly slightly smaller wetlands producing less methane.
That's the hypothesis. That combination, a bit less methane being produced by wetlands and more methane being removed by the expanding forests, could neatly explain that minimum, that dip in methane levels seen in the ice cores right around 1592.
Wow. Okay, so putting it all together, this devastating human tragedy, the great dying in the Americas, it didn't just impact CO2 through forest regrowth.
They likely also triggered this measurable global drop in atmospheric methane through these really quite subtle interconnected processes involving trees, microbes, and water cycles. Things we're really only starting to properly understand now.
It just deepens the story, doesn't it? That the planet's response was so immediate, so complex, and recorded in multiple ways in the ice.
It absolutely does. It highlights the intricate web of connections in the Earth system. How profoundly a massive demographic event, driven by human actions, could ripple through the entire planet's atmosphere.
So this whole debate about the official start date for the Anthropocene, you mentioned it was formally rejected as an epoch. Does that make this research, finding these early signals like 1610 or 1592, less relevant?
Not at all, I'd say.
Oh.
If anything, maybe more relevant beyond just the labeling argument. That debate might be settled for, now, formally. But the underlying science, what these ice cores reveal about human and environment interactions deep in the past, that's incredibly valuable.
How so? What else can we learn from this?
Well, for one, these historical events recorded in the ice give us a unique chance to test our understanding of these newly discovered processes, like how forests interact with methane. Gauchi and his colleagues, like Peter Hopcroft, they're still actively researching this, using these past events as natural experiments to refine climate models.
So history informing future climate science.
Exactly. And it pushes us to think about human impact much further back, too. It's not just about the post-Columbus era.
You mean even earlier?
Potentially. There's research suggesting that even large-scale forest clearance for early agriculture, say 5,000 to 8,000 years ago in the mid-Holocene, that might have contributed to the slow rise in atmospheric methane that we also see in Antarctic ice cores starting way back then.
Thousands of years ago, our ancestors potentially changing atmospheric methane just by clearing land for farms.
It's a possibility being explored. It really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? It suggests that significant human influence on the planet isn't just a thing of the last few centuries.
It takes us beyond just trying to define an epoch, like you said. It points to a much deeper, longer relationship between humans and the planet's systems.
I think that's the fundamental takeaway. Whether we look at ancient farming or the huge, tragic impacts of European colonization or the Industrial Revolution, these traces in the ice, in the earth, they reveal this incredibly intimate, constantly evolving connection between humanity and the natural world. A connection so deep, perhaps, that for most of our time as a species, we haven't really been separate from nature, but an integral, powerful part of it, affecting it and being affected by it globally.
So, recapping this deep dive, we've seen compelling evidence etched in ice cores suggesting significant human impact on the global atmosphere through both CO2 and methane might have begun centuries earlier than often assumed, triggered by colonization and the resulting demographic catastrophe in the Americas.
A sobering reminder of how interconnected global history and Earth systems really are.
Absolutely. So here's a thought for you, our listener, to maybe mull over. Considering this deeply intertwined, ancient, and often, well, unwitting impact humanity has had on the planet, stretching back centuries, maybe even millennia, how does knowing this history reshape your own perspective on our current environmental challenges? And what might it suggest about our capacity for future global change, whether that's positive or negative change?
A fascinating question indeed. Lots to think about there.
Definitely. A fascinating thought to continue exploring as you carry on with your own deep dives into the world around you. Okay, so let's try and unpack this. When did humans